All right, welcome back, everybody. You are tuned into the Now Morning Show right here on TTT. Continuing with the conversation surrounding consent, we are joined by Angelique V. Nixon, who is a lecturer at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. We are now going to join her and continue this topic. Good morning, Angelique.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, I was just speaking with Marvin Walker, who's a corporal of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and we were speaking on the topic of consent from a legal standpoint and what recourse victims of this type of crime can take now, and what currently exists in litigation. But with you, I want to go on a different note and speak about the gender side of things. So, Angelique, in matters such as this, tell us about the dynamic of gender equality and the disparity that currently exists in our society.
Well, when it comes to issues of sexual harassment and consent, we know that women and girls experience this disproportionately, meaning they experience it more at greater frequency and to greater harm than men do, and usually at the hands of men. But also when it comes to sexual harassment and issues of cyberbullying and harassment related to sex and gender, we have to remember as well that sex and gender minorities and members of the LGBTI plus community also experience forms of harassment and gender-based harassment and bullying because of sex and gender. And so there's a lot of inequality and injustice when it comes to these forms of harassment because of one's sex and gender.
Now, we are speaking specifically about the video that had been circulating around social media of a woman's body who was apparently sleeping when the perpetrator of the crime took a video unbeknownst to her and then shared it on social media, something that was very private. How do you feel about what has transpired, and afterward we'll chat about the ramifications of this on the different levels.
It's a complete violation. It's a complete violation of privacy. Obviously, there's no consent if someone is sleeping, and I think that because of the way we use online technology and the way that we're on social media, these things can happen so easily. And so that's why it's really important for us to have these kinds of conversations. We need to understand what consent is. We need to have conversations about this in schools, in our families, among our peer groups. And it's really important for us to have those open conversations. And when it comes to anything related to sex and the body, consent must be very clearly understood and given, and it must also be very clear between both parties or multiple parties when it comes to something like this. And it's just, this incident is obviously just a clear violation of privacy. It is a clear violation of this person's rights for how they wanted any information about themselves shared. And so it's completely a violation. And it is awful that we also then circulate these things across social media. It becomes a place of gossip and sharing and sip and, ooh, look at this, when we're not thinking about the person. I think also it comes down to empathy and compassion. How would you feel if that happened to you? What if it was a video of you? And I hope that we can have that conversation as well, where we turn it around and say, listen, this is also about empathy and compassion. And we also don't want this happening to anyone that we know and love.
That's right.
And we need to all engage in loving compassion and understanding of especially in these moments when we're using online and the virtual so much for every aspect of our work and our lives and our studying.
Yeah, that's right. And let's extrapolate on consent a little more, because when someone generally hears the term consent, they think about sexual consent and all the things related to that. But we're seeing even further, especially in this age we are in of social media and everything being online and so accessible at the tip of our fingers. We're seeing other means by which consent can be violated.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we need to really understand that consent requires willingness, choice, agreement, mutual respect, and permission. And always checking in with someone before you share something that you think is private. And there are instances where we absolutely know that this is not okay. And also using our very common sensibilities about what would we want someone to do with information about us, and really understanding what is in the public realm and what isn't. And I know it's very easy to think that, well, if it's on Facebook, it's public. But I do think that we have to pause and sometimes just check in, especially if you don't know the person, then say, no, this is not my business and I don't want to share it. If it's not in a very clearly public forum, I mean, obviously in something that is media. But even the media, quite frankly, gets it wrong. I mean, we had an incident last week where a victim of sexual assault's name was published in the paper.
Yeah.
And that is obviously a violation. So we also need to hold our media, frankly, to a much higher standard. And when you, as in media, do something that we don't agree with or violates privacy or are concerned about consent, we need to all raise that. And so it is a community effort, honestly.
Agreed completely. Now, Angelique, victims of such occurrences are sometimes shamed into thinking that they may have done something wrong or that they deserve to be violated. Can you, on the rights of women, can you comment on the rights of women where consent and privacy is concerned?
Yes. I mean, it is so very clear that we must do better and do more. I mean, the rights of women, the rights of the child, I think we can make those connections where it's happening so frequently where, in particular, women are shamed into believing that they've done something wrong. And this happens with all issues related to sexual harassment as well, and issues of consent, because we live in an unequal society that is very male-dominated in terms of our culture and practices, and so women automatically get to feel like, oh, what happened? What did you do? And so I think it is, it's really important for us to make sure that women and girls know that it is not their fault, especially if it has happened, something has been shared without their knowledge or consent, and when something happens. And so we need to really fight against that stigma and the shame that happens, especially with young people feeling immediately, and girls and women in particular, because we go to that place of guilt and shame right away. And the social costs and the stigma are so great. And so we all need to talk about that openly and say, no, that it is not your fault. And sometimes we need to say it. And I think it's important for us to all be a part of that raising up and lifting each other up and also holding each other accountable.
I think that what you just said is so important, holding each other accountable. And I may even go even further to say that men need to hold men accountable as well, because, if, for instance, your male friend is doing something that you know to be wrong, you know to be harassment or anything along those lines, or even worse, I think the onus is on every person to, speak up and hold them accountable and just call them out on what you know to be wrong.
Absolutely. In this project that I've been working on, we came up with a group of men, came up with it was a campaign, Pull Up Your Brethren. And we created these medium campaign messages. There are videos. We came up with something called Consent Doubles to help talk about consent. And the message around Pull Up Your Brethren is, it's not a shame. It's not a shame thing. I just telling you, don't do that. Don't speak to her like that. Don't engage in that kind of activity and behavior. Let's talk about it. Why do you think that's okay? And I think these are the kinds of conversations we absolutely need to be having, especially with young boys, especially with boys and girls. Yeah. All of the research shows that when boys and girls and when young people are empowered around their body, that they make much better decisions about their bodies when it comes to sex and reproductive health. When children and young people have comprehensive sex education, which is what we absolutely need, that empowers young people. It decreases teenage pregnancy, which is always a big concern. It also decreases gender-based violence and child sexual abuse. We know those things, and we have to keep saying it. We have the research, we have the studies here in Trinidad and Tobago as well as across the region to show that. And so we need to be advocating if we want change. We have to start with the youngest members of our society and ensure that children and young people and teenagers have access to the knowledge they need and they are fully empowered. And that also helps families because then young people can go home and talk to their family members. And we also need to have those conversations in religious spaces as well because there's such fear to teach young people about these issues, but we have to, and we have to embrace that across religions and spirituality and spiritual beliefs.
And we need to continue having these types of conversations, but that is all we have time for right now, but we do have to continue this talk and you know, continue to ventilate this topic because it is so very necessary now. But with that though, I want to thank you, Angelique V. Nixon, lecturer at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at UWI St. Augustine. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I hope we can have another conversation in the near future as we continue to extrapolate and ventilate on this topic of consent and, of course, gender equality here in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider world itself. We're now going to take a short break and come back, so stay with us.